Some of you may have heard me talk before about my younger brother, Brad. He's about 3 years younger than I am. And when Brad was about 9 months old, he had a series of grand mal seizures that did brain damage. So Brad has sort of never grown up in a lot of ways. Brad, he never learned to talk. He never really learned to take care of himself beyond just the very basics. He certainly learned how to have his needs met. He's very good at taking you by the hand and leading you toward the fridge and sort of shoving you at the fridge if he's hungry, or does a lot of eye pointing at what he wants. He's good at making his needs known, but he's very, very limited. And even though he's physically very healthy, he doesn't have, for a man in his mid-40s, he doesn't have much wrong with him physically. When you meet him, you can tell that there's something different. You can tell that there's something different about him. For one thing, he has that kind of funny gait. He leans forward and walks on the balls of his feet, and very often with his arms curled up at his shoulder. You can tell. He either will not make eye contact with you, he'll sort of glance at you out of the corners of his eyes, or he'll stare at you in a kind of a disconcerting way because he's never really learned how to be polite. And so you can tell. And when he's nervous, or when he's bored, or when he's unsure of a situation, he makes this really remarkable noise with his tongue and the back of his throat, this sort of snuffling sound. When I was a kid, I tried to duplicate it. I could never do it like he does, and I've never heard anybody else that can do it. But it's attention-getting. It can be kind of loud, and it's noticeable. So when you meet Brad, you know. And in a town the size of the one where the two of us grew up, a guy like Brad was pretty well known. A small town, everybody knew Brad. My parents and I have all had the experience of being out in a shopping center, in a store, in a restaurant with Brad, and somebody comes running up to us and starts to talk to Brad, completely ignoring us. We're just Brad's keepers. But they'll have this conversation with Brad. They know him from his being out in the community. His workshop used to do field trips and things. Everybody knows Brad. Nobody knows us. Brad is just a part of the fabric of the town. Brad is in a small town, he's a local institution. And most people have long ago gotten over being frightened of him or being uncomfortable with him. He's just Brad, and he's just part of the town. But I can remember growing up, there were times when we would be out of town, traveling on vacation, and we would run across people who didn't know Brad and who weren't willing to look past his idiosyncrasies. There's one story that always stays with me because it really got to me as a kid. We were in a restaurant somewhere on vacation. I didn't even remember where it was. And Brad was behaving well, but he was being Brad. He was doing his Brad thing. And there was a couple at a table next to us, a middle-aged couple, and through the whole meal they were sort of looking over and scowling and making faces at Brad. And finally the woman said to her husband in this voice that I know we were supposed to hear, "If somebody has something like that, why don't they just keep it at home instead of bringing it out in public and inflicting it on the rest of us?" That still gets me. And I remember how just shocked I was, and how hurt my parents were, and how as a little kid I just didn't get it. I didn't understand. I mean, this woman was calling my brother it, and that didn't make sense to me. And the fact that she was just willing to wipe him off the face of the earth. She was just willing to not deal with him because she didn't like looking at him while she was eating. It was like she couldn't stand to acknowledge that there was something like that in the world, in the same world that she lived in. In a very real way, that woman was looking at my brother as a leper. Some background on leprosy. We hear a lot about leprosy in the Bible, but most scholars agree now that the word that usually gets translated leprosy in the Old and New Testament is not the disease that we call leprosy today, not the disease that medicine now calls Hansen's disease, the disease with the numbness and loss of the extremities, Father Damien and the Molokai colony, that whole disease. That's really not what they're talking about in the Bible when they talk about leprosy. It seems to be some sort of a skin disease, and it seems to be characterized by white, scaly skin. something more like what they used to call the heartbreak of psoriasis. And in fact, the book of Leviticus even talks about the possibility that a house can get leprosy if it gets scaly patches on the walls, or that garments can be leprous if they have green patches on them. So in that case, it sounds more like mildew or mold or something. But in any case, it's not the horrible, fatal, disfiguring disease that we think of as leprosy. But what it is for the Israelites, the most important aspect of leprosy is that it's unclean. A leper is unclean. And now some more background, some more clarification. What do we mean by unclean? It's really hard for us today to get a clear sense of what the Israelites, what the Hebrew culture meant by clean and unclean, because it's so hard for us to take away from it our ideas of cleanliness, of killing germs, of getting rid of dirt, of being hygienic. That's not what clean and unclean meant for the Hebrews. When they talk about being ritually polluted or ritually clean. It's not about getting rid of germs. It's not about getting rid of dirt. It's not about preventing food poisoning from particular kinds of food. And even though it seems like it sometimes, it's really not about any sort of moral judgment on the thing or the person or the activity that is declared unclean or impure. One way that I've read about thinking about ritual purity, and there are people who disagree with this, but one way that it's been explained that made sense to me is that it's sort of a way of managing the way things ought to be. It's a way of managing all the multiplicity, all the variety in the universe, and sort of drawing a fence around what's okay, what's right, and then everything else that's somehow not quite right. Look at it this way. Fish are supposed to live in the ocean and have fins. That's what defines a fish. So an oyster lives in the ocean but doesn't have fins. So an oyster is somehow a defective fish. So an oyster is unclean, and a good Jew should not eat it. It's not saying that an oyster is evil. It's not saying an oyster is sinful. It's not even really saying an oyster is dirty. It's just inconvenient. It's just the wrong kind of fish. It's just outside the rules. It's just not right. The same way we were created with blood and all of our bodily fluids inside our body. That's where they're supposed to be. And so anytime blood or bodily fluids are outside of the body, that's unclean. Even for something as perfectly natural as childbirth or menstruation, those were considered unclean because blood is supposed to be inside the body. Does that make any sense? These examples seem really bizarre to us because they don't make any sense to us. But think about some of the things that we find just gross and wrong, even though they may not make sense. The things that make us sort of squirm and threaten our sense of propriety. The things that we know exist but we don't want to talk about or think about. When we watch somebody on a reality show eat a bug, we know intellectually that millions of people all over the world eat bugs. We know that eating a bug is not going to kill you, but we squirm when we watch the person take the bite out of that bug. We know that eating a bug really isn't that different from eating shrimp, right? Lots of legs, it's the same sort of thing. But it's gross, and we know it's gross. It's just wrong. It's not okay. It's outside of that fence. We might even get really nauseated watching somebody eat a bug. If you knew that your next door neighbor regularly ate bugs, you might have a hard time looking her in the eye, right? You might have a hard time shaking hands with the person that you knew ate bugs. All you need to say is, it's wrong. I don't know why it's wrong. I don't know why. It's just wrong, and I know it's wrong. That might be a kind of a close analog to this idea of clean and unclean. We know what's wrong. We don't have to know why. We just know it's wrong. Now, Naaman and Elisha know what's okay and they know what's wrong. They know the rules. They know the standard of what's acceptable and what needs to be kept hidden from the public. And they know that leprosy is at the very top of any Israelite gross out list. They know that lepers are required by law to live separately from everybody else until they're cured, that nobody wants to look at it. They're actually required to live outside the town walls. A person with leprosy is not allowed in town. But Naaman is this powerful guy, this guy with powerful friends, lots of money. He thinks he knows what he needs to do to be cured of this leprosy, of this thing that has driven him out of polite society. He's willing to travel far, to pay well for it, to go to this healer that he doesn't know anything about, but he expects a certain amount of show business, a certain amount of deference, a certain amount of to-do about his healing. He knows that he's different from ordinary people. He's powerful. He's one of the elite, and so he expects to be treated a little bit differently. But what he gets from Elisha is dismissive. The servant meets him at the gate and says, "Go wash yourself." No audience with the healer, no powders, no potions, no magic spells, no incantations, not even special exotic water imported from far away. Just go wash in the river like an ordinary person, like everybody else. So Naaman goes and washes in the river, and he's made clean, like an ordinary person, like everybody else. When he washes in the Jordan, Naaman is not only cured of his leprosy, not only cured of his disease, he's cured of the disease of thinking of himself as different from ordinary people. He's cured of his pride. He's cured of his superiority complex. He's brought back into the world, not only into the world of living inside the gates, but brought back into the world of ordinary people, his wife's servant and Elisha's servant, and of ordinary people all around the world. Ordinary is a funny word. Ordinary means as ordained. Ordinary means according to the rules. When we talk about the season after Epiphany and the season after Pentecost as ordinary time, we're not making a judgment about how boring they are. We're saying they're ordinary time because they follow the rules. They follow the ordinal numbers. So to be ordinary is to be according to the way it was ordained, according to the way you were created to be. Now Jesus and the leper in Mark's gospel, we don't know the leper's name, but Jesus and the leper also know the rules. What's ordained, what's okay and what's not okay, what's gross and wrong. They know that it's inappropriate, it's even criminal for a leper to approach another person, for a leper to impose his horrible, unpleasant disease on another person. They know that anybody who touches a leper is himself made unclean. If you touch a leper, you are unclean until the sun has risen the next day. They know that the final judgment for who is clean and who is unclean lies with the priests. You can't decide you're clean. Your friends can't decide you're clean. You have to be declared clean by the priests. The leper knows all this. Jesus knows all this. But the leper also knows that he believes that Jesus can heal him. He says, if you choose, you can make me clean. Maybe he's heard Jesus preaching. The last couple days we've heard about Jesus teaching with authority. Maybe he's seen Jesus casting out demons and healing. Somehow this leper knows that Jesus can make him clean. He knows what to expect, but the one thing he gets from Jesus is the one thing he never could have expected. That Jesus would stretch out his hands and touch him. That Jesus would pollute himself, make himself unclean so that the leper would be made clean. That Jesus would treat him as ordinary, like everybody else. And so by this touch, by Jesus touching the leper, he's not only cured of his disease, he's brought back into the world of ordinary people. He's brought back inside that fence of what's okay. He's made ordinary. He's made according to what is ordained. He's made clean. Now today, if we had a white scaly patch we'd be more likely to treat that with antibiotic ointment or hydrocortisone cream. Because as a society, as a civilization, we're really good at fixing things. We're really good at patching up our infirmities, or patching up and covering up the things that are gross, the things that are wrong, the things that we don't want to show, at least if we've got insurance or if we can afford health care. We're really good at fixing those things that we don't want to show. We convince ourselves that we've got the technical expertise to fix anything. We do away with the unexpected, the ugly, the unclean, the unpleasant. We get rid of all of those things, the things that don't follow the rules. Do you remember a few years ago, after the hurricanes in the Gulf, after Katrina and Rita, do you remember how many people were surprised watching the news coverage, surprised to see these people who had been living marginally, living on the edge, these people on the roofs of their houses? Who are these people? Why didn't they get out when they had the chance? When they heard the hurricane was coming, why didn't they just get in their cars and leave? Don't these people have insurance? What's wrong with these people? Why aren't they following the rules? Why aren't they doing what they're supposed to do? We suddenly had to look at this whole population of people, these poor people, these excluded people, these people who were literally living outside of our system, who in many cases were living outside of our city walls. These people who kind of threatened our understanding of how things were supposed to be. We had to look at them. We had to acknowledge that they were there. This population of previously invisible lepers. These people that made us uncomfortable because we had to acknowledge them. As a community, as a society, as a church, we had the opportunity to help these people, to give them jobs, to give them places to live, to give them food, to give them clothing, to fix their physical needs, to take care of the things that were broken. We did a great job of that. Because for those of us who live inside the walls, fixing is the easy part. We're really good at fixing. The hard part is overcoming our own deep fear and loathing of the different, the unclean, the leper. The hard part for us is stretching out our hand to touch those that we would rather not even acknowledge exist. The hard part is being able to put aside our own fear, to put aside our own need to keep ourselves clean, to be willing to get our hands dirty, to incorporate these people into our life and community so that their differentness, their leprosy becomes part of us and therefore ceases to frighten us. This is hard, but this is what we are called to do as members of the body of Christ. We're not called to fix the world. We're not called to make a world that's perfect without spot or blemish, without imperfection, without uncleanness and grossness. We're called to work towards a world that's whole. A world that's whole because it includes the beggar as well as the celebrity. A world that's whole because it includes the clean and the unclean. A world that's whole because it includes my brother as well as that lady who couldn't stand to look at my brother. We're called to work toward a world where there are no lepers, not because our medicine is so good that we can cure leprosy. We're called to work toward a world where there are no lepers, not because we're so good at fixing things, but because the people of God have invited the lepers inside the city walls. We're invited to make a world where there are no lepers because there are no walls and because we're all clean. Amen.